Welcome to the rating room. This is our first bonus episode, so welcome, Patreons. This is episode 1, the predictions for the next Bond.
As Jay said, we're going to take a look at some of the actors who are linked with playing the role of James Bond following Daniel Craig's departure. So we're going to get into some of the detail of who are the bookies' favourites, who we think may or may not take the role, past and previous and future work, and we'll see what we come up with at the end in terms of a rating.
Yeah, so Andy, before we kind of get into who are the bookies' favourites and some of our picks, outsiders you might call them, let's just take a step back and think before Daniel Craig was chosen, who were the actors considered at that point in time? So there was Rupert Friend, who played Peter Quinn in Homeland. We got Henry Cavill, who, interestingly, was deemed too young, actually, by Martin Campbell, who directed GoldenEye and Casino Royale.
Yeah, we had Sam Worthington before he was cast in Avatar and Terminator Salvation. We had Alex O'Loughlin, who you may know from Hawaii Five-0. Julian McMahon, who's currently in FBI Most Wanted, but was also in Nip Tuck and was Dr. Doom in the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, and we've got Clive Owen. So he's been in Children of Men, Sin City. Interestingly, as part of the research, Andy, apparently he actually wanted a percentage of the profits. So he was not chosen because of, and that did influence an impact on why he wasn't chosen. And Dougray Scott from Mission Impossible 2 and Hitman 2.
All those names were beaten out by Daniel Craig, who had previously been in Layer Cake and Road to Perdition, amongst other things.
Yeah, so Andy, thinking back to before Daniel Craig was successful in the casting, do you remember what your thoughts were on these actors that we just mentioned?
So thinking back, I recognise some of the names. Some of the names surprised me a little bit in terms of their choice at the time, but I know more of their work these days as opposed to what would have been 16, 17 years ago now. I do remember as well Daniel Craig being chosen, and I know there was a lot of kind of mixed feelings both in the press and with people I knew in terms of whether they'd make the right choice or not. But there's certainly 4 or 5 names on that list that I think could have been or would have been worthy contenders. How about yourself?
I remember Daniel Craig obviously being linked. I remember Clive Owen and Dougray Scott as well. I didn't really remember the other people that we just mentioned, but obviously we found those as part of the research. So yeah, I remember 15, 16 years ago, I remember Daniel Craig, Dougray Scott and Clive Owen were the 3 that kind of come to mind. Yeah, and I know you've obviously mentioned about the reaction of Daniel Craig and stuff, and we can cover that in a minute. Yeah, so they're the 3 that I kind of remembered at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I guess the real question is, looking back, did they make the right choice?
You're looking at these names that we picked out. I remember at that point in time, I wanted Clive Owen. Thinking back then, when it was between, I'm sure I recall it was Clive Owen and Daniel Craig were the 2 front runners, and I remember that Clive Owen was the one that me and the future wife were the ones that we kind of favoured as Clive Owen. It's difficult because these people haven't been cast as the James Bond. It's hard to make that choice because Daniel Craig, I think, is a good Bond, but I think other people on that list, I would say, look more of a conventional James Bond, if that makes sense, in terms of what you tend to perceive to be what James Bond looks like. So going through some of these names, I think Dougray Scott, Clive Owen, I think both look a James Bond kind of character. Henry Cavill as well. I think obviously we're going to talk about Henry Cavill later. He looks like a James Bond, I think. What about you, Andy? What do you think in terms of, did they make a right choice?
So similar thoughts to you, really. I think ultimately Daniel Craig did such a great job that it's hard to imagine anyone else playing the part in those films that he portrayed Bond in. I think of the names mentioned, Clive Owen and Dougray Scott are the 2 standouts for me. I think Clive Owen especially would have been your stereotypical Bond. He's somewhat Brosnan-like, you could say, in his demeanour and his stature. So it would have been in some ways a natural follow-on. I think Henry Cavill was probably not a name on my list at the time, and considering his age at the time would have been probably early to mid-20s, if I recall correctly. It's a safe argument to say yes, he's too young, but also if you think about the films that Craig was in and actually what they did with the films, i.e. a reboot from the beginning, having a young actor would not necessarily have been a bad choice. So Henry Cavill could have fit that mold quite easily. So I think ultimately I have to say yes, they did make the right choice, but it's still interesting to see what would have been, particularly with a name like a Clive Owen or a Dougray Scott.
Okay, Andy. So before we move on, I'm just going to throw this one out here. Going through the list, say yes or no in terms of would have you cast that actor? So Rupert Friend, would have you if Daniel Craig, if we remove Daniel Craig, and in terms of anyone being like a favorite, if they were the ones chosen, would you think it would have been a good casting? So Rupert Friend, do you have an opinion on that? If we're not familiar, then we can go and just pass.
Not overly familiar, so I'm going to say no on that one.
Okay, but you've obviously touched on Henry Cavill. Give your verdict on that one.
So I think this would have been a good choice, just based on the fact that it was a reboot of the franchise, so therefore you're looking for a younger actor naturally anyway, and also at the time he was doing some great stuff in the Tudors, and obviously since then has gone on to even bigger and better things. So I think you'd have been a good choice. So he's a yes from me.
Okay. Sam Worthington.
I would put him in the maybe pile. He's kind of got that rugged look and feel about him in a similar way to Craig had, so it would have been a fairly good fit. But other than the aforementioned Avatar and Terminator Salvation, I'm not familiar with him beyond that, so a maybe for me.
Okay, I'm going to butcher this person's name because when you said it so elegantly. So I'm going to say Alex O'Loughlin.
Yeah, that's probably right. I think I said Alex O'Loughlin. I think I said
Lovely.
it's my natural Irish personality coming out there because I am, as you know, 0% Irish. I'm going to say no. I've seen him only in Hawaii Five-0. He's okay, but no, not a Bond for me.
Okay, Julian McMahon, not to be confused. Is he related to any of your wrestling folks, Andy? When I saw his name, I thought, oh, I bet Andy's all over him.
I would assume not.
You would have thought he would have been in it, wouldn't you? But if he's an actor, you would have thought he would have been in it.
He would have been beat up by at least one or two famous wrestlers. I don't know him to be an egomaniac billionaire, so I don't think he's related. I put him in the same category as Alex O'Loughlin in that fine as an actor in what I've seen him in, but not a Bond for me.
Okay. Clive Owen.
Yep, but it would have been a great Bond, I think. Still would be a great Bond potentially, although the lifespan would be somewhat limited. Just looks like a Bond, acts like a Bond, ticks all the boxes, so I think it would have been a good choice.
Okay, Dougray Scott.
As above, I think he's tremendous, so he would have been a yes from me.
Okay, brilliant. So is there anything else we want to cover before we kind of move on to the feature that we're kind of really discussing, the next Bond?
No, let's get into the meat and potatoes of the matter at hand, I think.
Okay. So Andy, so what we've done, listeners, is me and Andy have kind of got together and kind of pulled together some criteria in terms of what we think the next James Bond should be. But before we kind of move on to that, Andy, I think one of the kind of like the past requirements in terms of who Bond should be tended to be white, male, conventionally attractive, but also they kind of have that appearance of Britishness, I would say, not necessarily English, British or Ireland, because obviously George Lazenby was Australian, but he did pass as a Brit. He was part of the Commonwealth. Now we move on to our bit. So, and I was going to go first. So, gender. What do you think in terms of the next Bond? What gender should the next Bond be?
I think Bond needs to be male, and I know there's a lot of talk of should Bond be a female, because that would be groundbreaking and revolutionary and take the series forward. I think if you want to make a strong female role, like 007, then someone needs to write one. Don't just shoehorn it into an existing one like James Bond, because I think it will always be less than. So I think stick with male, and someone write a film that's even better than Bond for a female role.
I agree. I think male. I saw an interview with Barbara Broccoli where she basically said if someone was, someone should write a strong female character, and there's actresses out there that could play Bond, as in, but not a Bond. A strong female characters like Charlize Theron. She'd be great as that type of character. Andy, over to you, in terms of the next criteria that we've picked out.
So, what do you think in terms of sexual orientation of the next Bond?
So I think heterosexual, just because he is a womanizer, isn't he, in the Bonds? And we're obviously keeping track in terms of our, season 1, in terms of our episodes, we're obviously keeping track of his sexual conquest as well. And they're obviously very prevalent in each movie. So I do think, and it is obviously all females that he's been linked with and engaged with, in the past 25 movies. So I do think that should continue, if I'm being honest.
I would agree. I think the Bond character is inherently heterosexual, and there's no need to change that. That doesn't mean that the actor playing Bond has to be. You can have a gay actor playing the straight part, which in itself, is forward thinking in that it is allowing homosexual actors more roles than maybe they're receiving currently. But I think the character is inherently heterosexual, is a womanizer, like you said, and there's no real need to change that dynamic, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree about the actor as well. Doesn't necessarily have to be heterosexual. Ethnicity, and obviously, I've just mentioned that in the past, the requirements tend to be white male. So what about going forward in terms of ethnicity? What's your view on ethnicity?
I think this kind of doesn't matter. I think any ethnicity works. I could be wrong, but I don't think it's ever specified that Bond has to be white. I think he just happens to be white. And please, feel free to correct me if anyone thinks differently or thinks I've got that wrong. But I think it's just one of those things that he started out white and has stayed that way. But there's very little about the character that says this is a white man. It is a man, and it's a straight man. And I think that plays out in all the films that we've seen so far, and we'll see as we continue the series. But I think the ethnicity is not necessarily a prerequisite, in my view. What say you?
I totally agree, and then you put it a lot better than how I could communicate it, really, in terms of, I would say any shape or color, but I'm going to obviously we're going to talk about build, so disregard that shape comment. I don't know what it says in the book, if it says anything, but as long as, like we said, male, straight, any color really, I think would be fine.
Yeah. What about his age?
Age, I think, in terms of casting an ex-Bond, and we're going to obviously talk about the top 10 shortly, I don't know what the plan is for the producers. If I was in their shoes, I think I would want to hire Bond, an actor to play Bond for the next 10, 15 years. I don't want it to be, we do a Bond for the next 2-3 films only. Say the film comes out every 2 years and then keep changing like that. I like someone to come in and really put their stamp on it, kind of really challenge. Obviously, people listening to our, main season at the moment, we're obviously ranking the actors. So at the moment, where we are from episode 8, we've both got Sean Connery as number 1. I want the next actor to come in to really challenge Sean Connery and potentially other actors when we rewatch those films. So I would say in terms of age, 30s, I would say. What about you?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you're probably talking a 4-film minimum would be how I would pitch it anyway. And considering how often the Bond films are released these days, they're fewer and further between than they used to be back in the day. So, Connery was pumping them out every year to start with. Craig has done 5 in 15 years, I believe it is. So let's say an average of every 3 to 4 years. So by the time said actor gets to their fourth and fifth film, they're going to be pushing 50 if they're early to mid 30s. So that seems to be a good age to start Bond at next time round.
Yeah, totally. So Andy, what kind of build do you think the next actor should be?
So I said needs to look like a badass. And I think what I mean by that is someone who is believable in the role. So has the physical attributes, the strength and the speed, but also has the kind of sophisticated element, can do the detective work, I suppose, for lack of a better term. So it needs to be someone who looks the part. And I think, you've got to have someone who looks like they can handle themselves in a fight at the very least.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you need to be well built. I think we mentioned The Rock in a previous episode, Andy. When I talk about well built, Andy, I don't know if the view is. I don't think it would be someone like The Rock, for example, or a younger version of, say, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Not that kind of well built like John Cena, who would modernize it. So, I think they have to be quite stocky, well built, not a dad bod, as people, use the dad bod kind of phase. But also, I think they've got to be good looking, kind of unattractive Bond. If he's at the moment, we're obviously tracking Bond girls, and I think it's 4 or 5 Bond girls per movie during Sean Connery's reign. So it's got to be believable. It can't be someone, I don't want to say anyone that's not attractive. We can't have someone like Ian Dowie walking on, being James Bond, can we? So yeah, they've got to be good looking, well built, but not too well built, like I said, in terms of The Rock, John Cena. I think that's too much.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And interestingly, The Rock has said he wants to be Bond, to come full circle after his granddad was a villain. But I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, it's not going to happen. You're too big and you're too old.
Yeah, I think I'm sure we meant, when we're talking about, you mentioned his granddad, it was He Only Lived Twice, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
So I think I can't remember, I said it, we both agreed, but I think The Rock would be a good villain, because he's intimidating. But also, keeping on the wrestling theme, Batista, he's been in it actually, isn't he?
He was a henchman, I guess, or a villain in Spectre.
So he can't be in it again. Well, he could be. We know the recycle actors.
Exactly, it's very possible.
Days. Yeah.
So let's talk about the top 10. By top 10, we're really looking at Bookie's favourites at this point. So we've got 10 actors that are ranked in order of odds to start with. So I'll go through the first few. So current Bookie's favourite is Regé-Jean Page with odds of 3-1. We'll get into some of the bios of each actor in a moment, so I'll just go through the names for now. Second favourite is currently Henry Cavill with odds of 4-1. Then we have Idris Elba, 6-1. And in fourth place, Tom Hardy, 7-1. I'll take over, Jay.
Yeah, so in fifth place, in terms of the bookies, we've got James Norton at 8-1. Richard Madden is 9-1. Jamie Dornan, 14-1. Tom Hopper at 16-1.
And rounding out the field, we've got Sam Heughan at 18-1. And rounding out the top 10 is Jamie Bell with odds of 20-1.
Yeah, so Andy, I don't know if you make any kind of bets or bookies. People probably already know this, but just to explain, you put £1 on and you would get £7 back for Tom Hardy.
Exactly right, yeah.
So I always like to bet. Well, I don't bet, but when I have bet, I never book on bet on favourites.
You've got to go long enough odds to make it profitable, but short enough odds to make it realistic.
Regardless of those names, Andy, if we just focus on the odds before we kind of deep diving in, what would be the odds that you'd think would be worthwhile out of those, regardless of the names?
So with a list like this, it's difficult because obviously if your favourite's 3-1, that means they don't really know. If you've got someone who's even or odds on, then it's pretty much a sure thing. I think in this instance, the field is quite widely spread. So I'd be tempted with a punt of around sort of 12 or 14-1 range if I was going into it blind.
I would go in the middle of those odds that we've just kind of mentioned. Now we're going to focus on our top 10 candidates. So what we're going to do, we're going to focus on our top 10 candidates now. So I'm just going to, let's go through the first one, Andy. So just so everyone's, aware that we're listening, we're going to talk about their age, nationality, the notable work, so what they've done previously, and then the future projects. And then me and Andy are just going to kind of give our verdict on each of the actors in the top 10. And then what we're going to do after that is we're going to pick 2 outsiders each. And then we're going to do a top 10, aren't we, Andy? You know, keeping our ratings theme. Top 10 based on the bookies. We're not including our 2 outsiders in that top 10. And also, we're going to get our wife's verdicts as well. So, you know, regular listeners to our main podcast will, you know, we're keeping that theme in terms of the wife verdict. So, kicking off in terms of the odds-on favourite, Regé-Jean Page. So he's 33 years old, his mid-30s. His nationality is British, so he's born in England. He's done his notable work. So he's done Bridgerton. So he was in there 1 season. He's not in anymore. He's not in season 2. He's also been in Waterloo Road for 1 season. He was in the remake of the Roots miniseries as well. And he was also in For the People for 1 season. So in terms of future works, he's in a film, well, he's in numerous films, but he's in The Grey Man. So this is directed by Anthony and Joe Russo, who are famous from directing films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The cast include Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans as well. So that's Chris Evans from the Marvel, not the radio DJ from, our British listeners will be familiar with. So that's a Netflix film, and it's also, interestingly, Andy, their most expensive film to date with a budget of $200 million. So that's a massive investment there. But he's also in Dungeons and Dragons. So that's obviously based on the role-playing game. So that's a film that they're making. That's due out next year. So we're in 22 at the moment. So it's due out sometime in 23. And that cast includes Chris Pine and Michelle Rodriguez. Andy, based on, what I've just told you, that intel and, other kind of knowledge you have regarding Regé-Jean Page, what's your verdict on our first candidate and also the bookmaker's favourite?
This is an interesting one because I've not really seen him in much to judge personally. I may have seen him in Waterloo Road, but I don't recall him. Obviously, very young, early 30s. He's a good-looking chap. If they're looking for 5 or 6 films, is the right sort of age. Bridgerton is a series I've not seen, but it's obviously a huge success with critical acclaim. So for him to be involved with that as one of the main players, and he stands him in good stead. For me, it's hard to say yay or nay because I've not seen him personally, but I think in terms of being Bookie's favourite, I can kind of understand why they would put him there based on the CV that he's got. What say you?
I'm like you. I've not seen him in anything. I've not even watched Bridgerton yet. Well, to be honest, I'm not going to watch it at all. It's not my kind of film, period dramas. But so I'm basing it purely on looks, really. He is obviously bookmaker's favourite, so there's obviously something about him. He has a lot of fanfare. So I agree with you. It's a good age. We both said the 30s. Realistically, I don't think a Bond's going to be out for the next 2 years. In terms of the release date, obviously they're going to make it before then. Well, I imagine, hope so. And I could see him doing the role for the next 15, 20 years, depending on how he ages. He seems to have the charisma, and that he's good looking as well. The only thing is, because I haven't seen him in much, and I can only base it on things I've seen on YouTube or photos. Does he have the physique? Is he intimidating enough is my concern. The thing that, I'm not jumping all over saying yes, really promote Regé-Jean for this role. So that's where I am at the moment. Bookmaker's favourite, I think, on the back of the stuff he's done for Bridgerton. But yeah, that's my verdict, Andy.
Interesting. So I think the jury's still out, but there's some positives there. Let's move on to Bookie's second favourite, Henry Cavill. 38 years old, also British, but born in Jersey. Quite a long list of impressive films and TV to his name. So he is Superman, films like Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, Justice League, etc. He's in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. He was in Mission Impossible Fallout. He was in Enola Holmes. He was also in 4 seasons of The Tudors on TV, and he's currently, I believe, or at least previously, starring in The Witcher. I believe it's currently, my wife's currently watching it and she loves it. And he's got some future projects, including the sequel to Enola Holmes, which is a Netflix movie likely to release later in the year. The next series of The Witcher, so he's reprising his role there. He's got a film called Argyle coming out, which is a spy film directed by Matthew Vaughn, and including Sam Rockwell, Bryce Dallas Howard, and John Cena in the cast. And there's other things he's been linked to, including the Rosie Project film and a reboot of Highlander. So there's a lot of big name films and TV shows already on his CV. What do you think about Henry Cavill's chances?
I like Henry. I think he's good age, in the 30s. He's at the top age of 30 though. So time next film comes out, is he going to be around 40 years old? He's been in a lot of good things. I like him in Superman. I've not seen The Man from U.N.C.L.E. actually. And I've not seen Mission Impossible because I don't watch Mission Impossible. So I'm not a Tom Cruise fan. I liked him in Enola Holmes. I like him in The Witcher. Me and the missus both like The Witcher. So he's got a very strong CV. And like we said earlier, he was second choice apparently, behind Daniel Craig, but lost out because he was deemed too young. He has the physical attributes of Bond. He's very keen to play Bond. I don't know if you've seen it. He's been in quite a few interviews, hasn't he, Andy, in terms of like talk shows, and presenter mentions being the next Bond. He's very open about wanting to have a conversation with the producers about that. So for me, yeah, I think he'll be a great Bond. I do. The only concern I would have is because he's in lots of stuff, is that going to impact on the amount of Bond films, his availability? Is my concern, because I don't know, in terms of when you sign a contract to be Bond, I'm assuming you sign up for, say, 4 films, for example, but I don't know if it stipulates in the contract you have to be available this year to do that film, that year to do this film. Do you know what I mean in terms of scheduling? And because it's so busy, is that going to cause issues in terms of, because like The Witcher, for example, that's being obviously commissioned for a 3rd season. It's a massive hit for Netflix. So you can imagine that's going to continue for a few more seasons. He's in the other films that you mentioned as well. So he's been linked to, the Highlander reboot. I don't know if that's a film or a TV series at the moment. So that's my only concern in terms of his availability. But otherwise, yes, he'd be a very good Bond. What about you?
Yeah, it's an interesting take on it, because I'm sure Daniel Craig did other things as well during his time as Bond, but I'm not sure how busy he particularly was. And also there was quite a gap between films, so I guess that allowed him to do other projects as well. But it's a very interesting one in terms of his current commitments and potential future commitments, whether he can fit everything in. I think what it does do is the fact that he's been in so many major roles means he can handle the pressure that seems to come with being Bond. I'm sure there's pressure on actors of many different roles, but it seems like pressure on Bond is just a little bit hamped up. There's a lot of, comparisons of whether, are they as good as Connery? Do they have the look? There always seems to be, the fact that we're talking about this now because it's in the news and there's no Bond film scheduled, there's no Bond actor cast, yet it's still all over the news because it's such a pivotal role, suggests that pressure is everywhere. But the fact that he's been in so many big roles would suggest he could probably handle that quite well. And for me, I agree, he ticks all the boxes. He's very suave and sophisticated. He's ripped. He's good looking. I really enjoyed him in The Tudors as Henry VIII's kind of womanizing mate. I thought he played that really well. And I enjoyed, I'm not a big fan of the Superman films, but I thought he played the role well. So definitely a top contender for me.
Yeah, and talking about pressure, Andy, I think he would handle it, considering he's Superman. So, that has a lot of pressure, doesn't it? Being Superman.
That's a major role to take on, yeah.
And he's very keen to continue that role, in terms of future DC films. He's come out and said, I want to continue to be Superman. Because obviously they've recast Batman. So Ben Affleck's no longer Batman, but he's come out and said, I want to still be Superman. But yeah, no, I agree. I think we're both singing from the same hymn sheet there, really. Henry, he's got out the stamp of approval from the rating room, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if that holds any weight in Hollywood, but rating room approved, he can add that to his CV, that's for
sure. Before we move on, and I know digressing a bit, when you're talking about future projects, I really enjoyed Highlander, so I would love him to be in the new Highlander. I think it would fit in Highlander. I do.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm a Highlander fan as well. It's been a while. That could be one for a future podcast series in years to come. But Yeah, well, that's interesting that he's linked to it.
I just talk about Highlander. So me and the wife, I'm trying to get my wife to watch more 80s movies. I don't know if you heard on this, Andy, but in the older days, in the 80s when we were kids, I don't know what kind of trailers to have. But so if you look for an 80s film trailer on YouTube, it's just really dodgy. So I put the Highlander film on for the missus, the trailer. And I said, "Oh, do you want to watch this?" And she just like watched it and said, "No, no chance." But watching the trailer is just really bad because they've got, in those days, it had that voice over all the trailers and how it was all cut. And it's just like, oh, I was saying to her, you got to watch it. It's so good. There can only be one. And obviously that just went flying over her head. That did. She just didn't get it. But no, that would be, Highlander, I think, definitely for me. But then is that going to impact on James Bond? So he's too talented, Andy, for his own good.
Highlander or James Bond, there can be only one.
Also, Andy, actually, I don't know. I'm sure this will have be a factor for the producers, but I think he would probably be one of the more expensive options on the list. I don't know if that would swing it, but in terms of, because he's very successful already, I bet he's going to cost a lot more than some of the other people in that top 10.
I tend to agree. He's going to want top dollar.
Yes.
But you get what you pay for, I guess.
Yes, you do. Well, yeah. I'm sure there's been some football flops out there that doesn't quite work out. Okay, so we are on number 3, aren't we, Andy, in terms of the top 10, I think. Top 10 book is not our number 3. So Idris Elba. So age 49. So he's British, born in England, notable work. So he's been in Luther for 5 seasons, good TV show that. The Wire, 3 seasons as well, a great TV program. He was in Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom, a film. And he's also been in a number of Marvel films. So he's been in the Thor trilogy. They're obviously making a number 4. So he's been in those 3 films. He's been in Avengers, Age of Ultron, and the Infinity War. He's also been in Hobbs and Shaw, which is part of the Fast and Furious universe. It's kind of a spin-off. And he's also been in the latest, The Suicide Squad. So I've seen some of those films. So he's got a strong CV so far. Future projects. So he's been cast in the 3,000 Years of Longing film. So release date is to be announced. That's directed by George Miller. So Mad Max, things from the Mad Max franchise. And casting includes Tilda Swinton, who's a very good actress. He's also been cast in a film called Beast, and that's a thriller to be released later this year. And he's got 2 other films. So he's got Heads of State, which is an Amazon Studios produced film. And, continuing in wrestling theme, Andy. So John Cena's in this one, but there's no release date at present. And also, Andy, I don't know if you watched, you can obviously mention this in a minute. They're making a film of Luther. So that's the continuation of the hit TV series as well. So that release date, they've announced that, but the announcement in terms of when it's going to be released hasn't been announced yet. So Andy, what's your thoughts on Idris?
So I'm a big Idris Elba fan. Love Luther. Thought that was tremendous. And The Wire is one of my favourite TV series of all time. And he was great in that. Again, he's got a really good CV, some really big roles. I think he would be a really, really good Bond. The thing that's going to let him down is the fact that he's now 49. If going to be a series of 5 or 6 films, then that, he's going to be aging when it gets to the latter ones, and whether that works or not, I guess, is a bit unknown. If it's a one-off, or 2 or 3, fair enough. But if you're wanting more than that, it's going to be difficult to kind of fit that in before Father Time catches up. But aside from age, he'd be a great pick in my opinion. How would you assess Idris's chances or capabilities?
Yeah, so Andy, while you was just talking, I was paying attention. I was thinking, would he be the oldest Bond when he was originally cast? And Roger Moore was 45, so yeah, he would be. If he was cast now, he would be the oldest Bond.
So he'd be into his 50s before
he
could make and the film would be released.
So he'd be basically nearly ready to collect his pension before he even started, from the Bond. I'm sure there must have early retirement in the Secret Service. I agree, and he's got a really good CV. He's a busy actor as well. So in terms of what we said about Henry, I think, he is busy. He's very in demand. For me, if he was 10 years younger, then I think yes, and he would, probably feature high on my list later on. I think he would play a good villain though. But for me, even though he's really good, and what I said earlier, I want someone to come in to do 10 to 15 years. I don't think so. It's a no for me. And before we move on, Andy, I've noticed a little theme, between these three people and also the ones before. We've obviously, is it 6 degrees of separation?
The Kevin Bacon.
Yeah. I've noticed when we've named some of these, we've got some links. George Miller, Mad Max franchise. So he's the director, creator of Mad Max. And we're obviously going to go on to another actor soon that appeared in Mad Max. Mentioned John Cena, who we've just been talking about The Rock. So we've got a wrestling connection there. Got the Hobbs and Shaw as well. So that's The Rock. And we just mentioned John Cena. So some of these things that we've been talking about, I've just noticed little connections between, obviously we mentioned Superman, and we've got Idris has been in the Suicide Squad. So they're both DC films franchises. So yeah, I just noticed a little 6 degrees separation appearing as well between some of these. Like Chris Evans. So in Reggae, Jean Page, Chris Evans is obviously Captain America. We've just talked about Idris appearing in the Marvel films. So yeah, just as and Michelle Rodriguez appears in Fast and Furious franchise. So we just, talked about, the Hobbs and Shaw. So yeah, just noticed there's a bit of 6 degrees separation going on with some of these people.
Very interesting, yeah.
Just an observation I've noticed, Andy.
I guess it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah, so the future projects for Henry includes Argyle, like you mentioned, which cast includes John Cena.
Very, very interesting. What I'm hoping is that when the producers of the next Bond film sit down and shortlist these actors, and they go through the same top 10 that we're going through now, and they go, do you know what? All of these actors have been mentioned on the rating room. We should add Jay and Andy to this list as well, as make it a top 12. Just throwing that out there.
I would love to be in a James Bond film, but I obviously couldn't play James Bond. I don't have the body or the looks, but I would love to be a villain in James Bond.
I could be a good James Bond, but I would take it in a very different direction. Because, you'd take away the looks, you'd take away the body, you'd take away the womanizing. So I don't think my wife would go for that somehow. Take away all the sophistication that Bond has, because I have none of that. It becomes a very, very earthy, gritty, working class kind of film. And maybe, Bond's no longer a secret agent. Maybe he just works in an office. And the mission is to unclog the photocopier or something.
Maybe they're downsized and that's it. Because they're downsized, the budget, all the good 00 agents have left to go and work for another organization. And then they've left with us, basically, to pick up the parts.
It's Bond in a post-COVID world.
Yeah. But no, if I was an actor, I'd rather play the baddie. I would.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that means one film only, to the potential of being in 3, 4, 5 films, but I just think it'd be more exciting.
But you could be the new Blofeld.
Yeah. I'm slightly getting bored.
I mean, you've got your granddad as well, who is a villain as well.
Yeah. Yes.
So he can give you lots of tips on how to lie and cheat and steal your way through the Bond universe.
True.
Let's give us a call, Hollywood. Yeah. Let's get back to the topic at hand. So fourth on the bookies list was Tom Hardy. He's age 44, British, from England. A huge list of notable work. Pick out a few things. So it was in the film Bronson, TV series Peaky Blinders, the films Warrior, The Revenant, Mad Max Fury Road, Inception, The Dark Knight Rises, Venom, and Venom Let There Be Carnage. Just to name a few things that he's in. He's got some future projects lined up, including the next Mad Max film called The Wasteland, which will be the 5th Mad Max film. A film called Havoc for Netflix, which includes Forrest Whitaker and Timothy Olyphant in the cast. The Things They Carried, which is a Vietnam War film due to be made with Ty Sheridan, Stephen James, Pete Davidson. And the film Shackleton, about the explorer Ernest Shackleton, who led expeditions to the Antarctic. So he's got a lot of work lined up. He's got a lot of stuff on his CV. Kind of a Hollywood darling these days, you might say, with how busy and how popular he is. But is he a potential Bond? What do you think, Jay?
He's one of my favourite actors, actually. You know, the films that you list there, I've seen pretty much all of them. I haven't seen the latest Venom, and I've not seen Bronson, but the other films he's been in have been brilliant. So he's got a great CV, like some of the other actors on this list. But again, for me, you know, like the last two actors that we just mentioned, Henry and Idris, he's always busy. So he's one of those actors, you know, there's some actors out there that probably only churn out one film, two films every few years. He's always constantly working, and he's mixing TV with films as well. So he's very diverse in the roles he plays as well. So he has that in his locker. So his availability, would that be a bit of a blocker? I think it potentially would. If they were going down the path in terms of getting 4 or 5 films out, he's 44. So, you know, he's going to be approaching 60 probably if he did that many films, top end of 50s. So depending on how he ages, it might be too old. If he was a few years younger, I would say definitely yes. If they were only going to have him for 2 or 3 films, then yes, again. But like I said, with all his work and the things that he's already signed up for over the next few years, I think he's obviously one of the bookie's favourites, but realistically, in terms of his availability, does that mean he's probably not going to be? What about you, Andy? What's your thoughts on Tom Hardy?
So I put Tom Hardy in the same category as Idris Elba. Fantastic, fantastic actor. And I think he'd be a brilliant Bond, but age 44 is a little bit old potentially. Although slightly younger than Roger Moore was when he debuted as Bond back in 1973, and Roger Moore stayed on for 7 films. The difference is that those 7 films were all released within, I think, a 12-year window. I think these days, with how they space the Bond films out, I think if he was to play Bond for 12 years, you probably just get 3 films out of him maximum, which is possibly not enough if you're wanting to create a longer story arc, but that's just kind of how it falls. But yeah, other than age, he's got all the tools. So I think he would be a tremendous Bond, but probably should have 5-10 years earlier would have been the time to cast him if you were going to change Bond.
Yeah, so we both kind of agree there. I wonder as well, you know, when they're talking about the next films, do they kind of have an idea in terms of, okay, this is the path we want to do for the next 3 to 4 films. This is kind of like the character arc that we want to take him, you know, the audience on. You know, like the Daniel Craig, the reboot that they did with Daniel Craig, I felt was very different compared to previous Bonds, you know, in terms of like the arc. And I just wanted the next one. Are they thinking, oh, let's do 3, 4, 5 films? This is going to be kind of like the story arc over these. So this means we want this actor to play that role. Or are they going to go, you know, next 4 or 5 films are just going to be little silos, or, you know, obviously in the same universe, but, you know, that's that story. That's that story. Whereas, you know, the Daniel Craig ones, you know, it's gone back to like the Spectre times. Are they going to be like more independent, like the Roger Moore films? I'm wondering, therefore, you could have someone like, say, Tom Hardy, where he comes in, knocked out 3 films maybe, and then moves on. I just wonder, you know, in terms of the producers, what are they thinking?
Yeah, that is interesting, because obviously with Craig being a reboot, it was the first time that Bond kind of started again after 20 films, which was arguably a continuous story. Although, like you said, standalone in terms of the stories of the films, you didn't need to watch the previous one to understand the next one. But with Craig, they all link together from beginning to end. So how do they reboot? Do they continue the story somehow? Do they go down an origin route? Number of options that they could take, and I guess that determines who they would pick for the role. So that's a fascinating topic. Probably a podcast all of its own, to be honest. So we could chat about that all day.
We could, yes. Now, moving on to James Norton, I must be honest, Andy, I'm going to hold my hands up here. I knew nothing about this actor. When I researched for our special podcast episode, I recognize his face, but I'm just going to list his notable works in a minute. But I'm going to hold my hands up and say I've not watched any of them before. So, James Norton, age 36, nationality British, he was born in England. Notable works, so he was in Happy Valley TV, he was in for 2 seasons. Grant Chester TV series, he was in there for 4 seasons. Mafia, so I believe that's the Sky original. That's TV, 1 season. The Nevers, so TV series, it's been in 1 season. That, Andy, I have heard of, and it's on my watch list, but it's one of probably 100 programs on my watch list across the multiple platforms that we have. He's been in a few films, but mostly his CV consists of TV work. So future projects, again, TV. So it's going to be in a new season of Happy Valley and also the new seasons of Mafia, which I don't believe it's a mafia program at McDonald's, but, I haven't watched it, so I can't tell you for certain. But also Free Guard is a film. Interestingly, Andy, this is based on a thriller, so a British thriller, where this British conman imposter who masqueraded as an MI5 agent. So we're going to see him as a government agent in the future anyway. So depending when that, well, I think it's going to be too late when it comes out. That could have been his audition for the Bond role. So what's your thoughts on James Norton?
So I don't think I've seen anything that he's been in, except for, I think I've seen The Nevers, but I don't know if I'm confusing it with something else. And if I did watch The Nevers, I don't remember him in it. And if it is the show I'm thinking of, I didn't enjoy the show. So it's difficult to judge on that. Lacking a bit of star power, I think, is the note that we've maybe both taken on this. And I wonder if this could actually be an advantage. So I mentioned earlier, and this kind of going against my own earlier point around Henry Cavill, he's had the big role so he can handle the pressure. I wonder if choosing an actor who is lesser known actually works as a positive, because there's less hype around him. There's less to live up to. So if the pressure's off, maybe he does his best work. But this kind of falls into the category of, I don't know, because I don't really know who he is. Anything to add to that?
Like I said, I've not seen him in anything either. We, like you just said, both mentioned about the star power in terms of our notes. The majority of his work has been TV work, but we know from other actors that have played Bond, we know that they've done TV work as well. Does his background kind of fit with this? He does look the part, and he's 36. So in terms of what we both said earlier, he fits the profile. So I'm undecided because I haven't really seen him in anything, but I've not discarded him, Andy.
Good to know. So 6th favourite, according to the bookies, is Richard Madden, age 35, British, from Scotland. Been in a few TV series and films, including Game of Thrones, The Bodyguard for 1 series. He was in 3 series of Game of Thrones. He's also been in the films Eternals, 1917, Rocket Man, and he's got an upcoming Amazon Studios series about a spy with several location spin-offs. So it's set across the world: Italy, India, Spain, Mexico, due to be released later this year. So again, a decent body of work already. Is he Bond-worthy material, though, Jay?
I think he is. So he kind of fits our profile in terms of age, in terms of looks as well. I don't know if you've seen Bodyguard, but he plays obviously a bodyguard, but someone that works for the police force, and he has that physique. I've not seen Eternals yet. That's another one on my watch list, and so is 1917. That's another one on my watch list. I'm not bothered about Rocket Man. So I think he could easily play Bond. I think due to his age, he could do it for the next 10, 15 years as well. So in terms of a longer story arc, you want to, have someone really to kind of put their mark on the role. He's a good actor. And also in terms of researching, his future projects, apart from Citadel, I couldn't find anything, Andy. So is that on purpose? Is he keeping his diary free, for that phone call? Or you just can't get anything? But interestingly, Andy, just got on to kind of expand on the Citadel bit as well. That was interesting, Andy, because I don't know if anyone's ever done this before. So what they've done is they've got a main series, which he's in, but then what they're doing is doing several spin-offs. So in Italy, India, Spain, and Mexico, which are kind of related to the main bit, but they're actually going to be shot in their native language. So it's all within the same universe. But I thought that was quite interesting how it's going to be all interlinked. And I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. It's not like a spin-off like, you have spin-offs as, say, CSI or, NCIS and stuff like that. This seemed to be like, oh, you've got your main series, but then they've done these other ones, which are going to be based in that, that local language, which obviously relates to spies. Are they then going to focus on like the criminal organizations, or are they going to focus on that spy organization in that country? And it's all going to link with the main story arc, which is being filmed in Britain, I believe. So yeah, just wanted to kind of mention that. I thought that was sounding interesting. So that was my verdict. What about you in terms of Richard Madden?
That's interesting. You mentioned about his lack of future projects. I mean, does he know something that we don't? But I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think he's in that sweet spot in terms of age. I think he's young enough to play the part long term. So like you said, the next 10, 15 years or half a dozen movies or whatever that may be. But he's also old enough to be believable. So he's not baby-faced. He's not too young. And the fact that he's got some big parts on his CV already, I mean, particularly Game of Thrones, and I thought he was tremendous in The Bodyguard. Very, very good series that was. For me, right at the top of the list in terms of potential. He's got the looks, he's got the skills, he's got that charisma, he's got that natural style. I'm struggling to think of a better choice than Richard Madden, to be honest.
You've obviously said you watched Bodyguard. You said it's really good. Do you know if they're making any more Bodyguards?
I have not seen anything.
Because I didn't notice it on his future projects, but I wonder whether he's committed to that, but they haven't announced it. So maybe that's one of the reasons why he's not committed. And I've not seen Eternal, so I don't know whether he survives in that film or not. So when they do the next one in the Eternals, I don't know if he's going to be in that, but I've not seen it yet. So he might die, he might live. But I just wonder, again, maybe that's why he's not got stuff planned, because he's tied in potentially in terms of contracts. I don't know.
So yeah, the Bodyguard has not been formally renewed, but it seems to be heavily rumoured that it will happen. From some of the articles I'm seeing when I look online, I think the problem is just waiting for everyone to stop being busy so they can get the band back together, as it were.
Next one on the list, Jamie Dornan, age 39. So Andy's just in our age group, but by the time, it's released, he's tipping over to the 40, 41 marks. But, you could argue he's in our age profile that we said. So he's British. He was born in Northern Ireland. Notable work. So he was in The Fall. So he's in 3 seasons of The Fall. I think his biggest job on his CV is the 50 Shades franchise that my wife has seen, but I haven't. So he's in the trilogy there. He's in a film as well for Belfast, which has won a lot of accolades as well, but I've not seen. And he's also in a TV series, Andy, that is being marketed and I've seen a lot of advertisements for that, but I haven't got around to seeing it yet. And to be honest, it's not even made it onto my watch list yet. The Tourist, so that's a TV miniseries. In terms of future projects, again, Andy, I could only find the one for this actor. So again, is that because he's keeping his diary free, or they've just not announced his future projects? Is all tight-lipped. So he's in a Netflix film, so Heart of Stone, and that is supposed to be a spy thriller. What's your thoughts on actor number 7 in our top 10?
So this is an actor, I know who he is, but I'm not familiar with any of his work. I'm not. So 50 Shades obviously is a huge book and film franchise. I've not seen them myself. My wife, I think, watched the first one and said it was quite boring. So that gave me a lot of confidence in terms of my skills if she's finding that kind of stuff boring. But that's another podcast for another time. The only thing I noted, and this is just pure speculation on my behalf, is could the connection with 50 Shades be a good marketing tool to attract more female viewers to the Bond franchise? Not that the Bond franchise necessarily is lacking female viewers, but there's that sex appeal there allegedly with this guy. So for me, I'm unsure. I don't know his work well enough to judge either way. So the jury is out. How would you judge his chances?
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned about obviously James Bond and the 50 Shades of Grey, because can you just imagine the sex scenes that if he does with James Bond, he's like, don't worry, I've got my own props, and he just brings all the stuff over that he's got from 50 Shades of Grey franchise.
His gadgets from Q would be very, very different, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Yeah, poor Q. Yeah, so because I've seen the first 2 seasons of The Fall where he plays a serial killer, and he was very good in that. But like I mentioned earlier, I've not seen 50 Shades of Grey. My wife likes him, and I've not seen the other things that we mentioned. I'm trying to think if anything else that I've seen him in smaller parts. So he's famous, I think really because of the 50 Shades of Grey. I think that's probably his biggest gig. He looks the part though, Andy. I think he looks like a Bond. He's very attractive, very suave, but also he can play that more darker, rough kind of Bond if they wanted to continue the gritty kind of path, carry on down a path that Daniel Craig took Bond on. So I do think he could play that type of Bond. So you've got your both ends kind of the spectrum there. For me, I personally wouldn't be disappointed with him being cast, but he's not my favorite, is my concluding statement.
There we go. You've heard it here first. Number 7 pick. And let's move on to number 8. Tom Hopper, age 37, Englishman. Has been in various TV series, including Merlin, Black Sails, Game of Thrones, The Umbrella Academy. Was also in the Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City film. And some future projects he's got lined up is another series of The Umbrella Academy for TV, a film called Climber about the American mountaineer Gary Hemming, and also a Netflix film called Love in the Villa, a romantic comedy. What about Tom Hopper then, Jay? Is he on your shortlist for James Bond?
If I had a shortlist, Andy, he wouldn't be. He's obviously on the bookish shortlist, but he wouldn't be a name that I would have picked, if I'm being honest. I've seen a number of those TV programs. Obviously, I watched Game of Thrones, but it was only in a few episodes. Black Sails, I think I only saw the first 2 seasons. And Merlin, I think I watched the first season. I do recall him in Merlin and Black Sails. And I do recall him in Game of Thrones, but he was only in a few episodes. I've not seen The Umbrella Academy. It's one of those on my watch list. And I'm not seeing the Resident Evil film. For me, it is largely TV work that is done. So it's similar to, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, to some of the Bond actors that we've seen, in terms of TV work. I don't think he looks like a Bond, if I'm being honest. He has the physique. He is good looking. But when I look at him, I don't instantly think, oh, that's a James Bond actor, future James Bond actor in the making. But not really excited by him. If it's the age profile, in the 30s. But yeah, he's not doing it for me, Andy. What about you?
So he's another one on my list of who is this guy. Of the things kind of pointed out as his notable work, the only thing I've seen is Game of Thrones, and I have no idea what part he played in that. I don't remember him at all. It's difficult to judge without really knowing who he is. I don't want to say no outright because of anything I've evidenced, but I haven't got a clue who he is. So on that basis, if he enters my audition room, I'm going to ask security to check for his credentials. So he goes in the mystery box.
Mystery box. Okay, that's fair enough, Andy. I mean, these are the top 10 based on bookies, so they're not our top 10.
Yeah, we're not yet firmly established in the TV film world, so we don't have as many connections as other people do. So that's why we don't know quite so many people.
No, and maybe one day
our time will come.
Yes, that's what I was
time,
exactly thinking then. So next one on, Sam Heughan. So he's 41, Andy. So he's just tipping out of our little age profile, but he's still okay, still younger than Tom Hardy. So he's British. He was born in Scotland. His notable work. So he's in Outlander, the Amazon TV program. So he's in that for 5 seasons, and they are doing more seasons. So I think he's committed to the next. I think there's up to 6, 7, and 8. I think they've announced, Andy. So he's got those future commitments there. He's also in Bloodshot, a Vin Diesel film, SAS Red Notice, and The Spy Who Dumped Me. Very Bond feel, likeness there. The Spy Who Dumped Me, obviously a play on words there. Future projects, Everest, not to be confused with the film that came out a few years ago, The Everest there. This is an Amazon film with Ewan McGregor and Mark Strong. So that is supposed to be released next year in 23. So, you know, he is filming that. So he's still got a bit of time before that's released. And he's in a remake, would you call it? It's adapted from a Danish TV series. So Suspect. So this is a British TV thriller with James Nesbitt. So Andy, what's your thoughts on Sam Heughan?
So for the last guy, was it Tom Hopper? I said I didn't want to say no because I'd not seen any of his work, so it'd be unfair to judge. This time, however, it's a straight no from me. I don't know who he is. It doesn't look like Bond. He's in his 40s. Straight pass. Move on.
Very concise, Andy. I will just say I'm not sure either. He's not my favourite. I don't think he looks like Bond. He's not done many films, and the films he has done, I don't think they've been any good. I've only personally watched Outlander season 1. Again, it's on my watch list. So yeah, let's just move on. That he doesn't float our boat, does he, Sam? So next one, I think this is the last one on our list, isn't it, Andy? Before we move on to our outsiders.
Last one, yeah. 10th on the list is Jamie Bell, English actor, age 35. Probably most famous for the film Billy Elliot, but he's also in the film King Kong and the film Rocket Man, as well as 4 series of the TV show Turn Washington Spies. He's got a few future projects lined up, including a film called Surrounded, a TV series for Apple TV Plus called Shining Girls, and also a biopic based on Fred and Ginger to be made by Amazon Studios. So he rounds out the top 10 for the bookmakers. How do you round him out, his chances as being the next Bond?
I think he's a good actor. He fixed the age profile. I think I googled his height. I think he's quite short. He's not a 6-footer. So in terms of physique, I don't think he's that intimidating. But although Daniel Craig isn't 6 foot, is he? I love Billy Elliot. It's a brilliant film, but I think he looks, I know we both made this note, he's very fresh-faced, isn't he? Even though he's 35, only, how old is he compared to you, Andy? Is he like 1 or 2 years younger than you?
2 years younger than me, but looks about 25 years younger than me.
I don't know, that says more about you than it says about Jamie Bell. But yeah, he just looks so young. So yeah, he doesn't do it for me. He is a great actor. And again, Turn Washington Spies was on my watch list, Andy, and I watched the first season the other year when I thought, you know what, I'm going to start watching it again. Amazon have took it off the Prime, so I have to pay for the honor to watch it. So I've kept it on my watch list for the day it returns to Amazon Prime. But no, yeah, it's a no for me. What about you?
Yeah, see, if he was that good, you'd have paid good money to see him, and you're not willing to pay, so he's not worth your time and effort. I've got similar notes to you. I think he still looks like a boy. You can't have a boy playing a man's role. Good actor, he's not good enough for Bond, so it's a no from me. So that rounds out the bookies' top 10. What we thought we'd do at this point is just pick a couple of actors each who are kind of outside the top 10, maybe outsiders, maybe they're not even considered, or maybe they are considered, but a long shot. So we've chosen 2 each. Jay, do you want to go with your first one?
Yeah, so Andy, the top 10, I think we've both agreed before we came online that it's a strong top 10. There's a couple of actors in there that we both said we're not quite familiar. So I found this task of picking 2 outsiders a bit difficult. So my first choice, who I do think would be a good James Bond, is Henry Golding. So he's 35. He's also the first non-British person on the list, Andy, that we just mentioned. So he's from Malaysia. So his notable works include Crazy Rich Asians, Last Christmas, and Snake Eyes. And his future projects, the filming the Crazy Rich Asians 2 sequels based on the books back to back. He's in a film called Persuasion, which is based on a Jane Austen book, and that includes Richard E. Grant and Dakota Johnson. And then Assassin Club film. So that's a spy movie, Andy. So a few of these actors we've mentioned seem to have spy movie jobs already lined up. That's got Sam Neill in. So for me, He's my actor number one, so not necessarily the first choice out of my wild list. It's just the first name that kind of came to my head. Good age. He looks like a Bond, good physique, good looking chap. Not British though. So I know we've had George Lazenby as an Aussie. Does that go against him? But he can pull off a British accent. The films I've seen him in, so I've seen him in Crazy Rich Asians, Last Christmas, I think it was very good. So he was my first wild card. What's your verdicts on Henry Golding?
So again, this is a guy I have no idea who he is. So my notes here are somewhat limited. I will say he does look the part. Absolutely does look the part. And age 35 is kind of that sweet spot that we talked about. So on the surface, superficially, can't see anything wrong with it. He looks like he would be a good Bond. It's the right age, but in terms of his acting chops, I've not seen any of his work to judge. So the jury's out for me.
So, Andy, actor number two. So I was Googling this for ages. I was looking at various people and I was thinking, like, I didn't want to pick someone that I knew wouldn't be an option straight away. So, like, you know, they were too old or too young. Also, like we both said we think it should be a male actor. So I discarded looking at female actors. So I was thinking, like, who could it be? And you know what, Andy, as part of the podcast notes, I was going to put myself down as a joke. And then I was going to like make up some notable works and future projects. But then I thought, nope, this is for our patron members. I can't be messing about. So I picked Michael Fassbender. So he is 44 years old. So that kind of goes against what we said earlier. He's German, but he can pass as British. Notable work. So he's been in 4 X-Men films, Inglourious Basterds, Prometheus, Macbeth, Steve Jobs as well, and future projects. So he's in Kung Fury 2. So that's supposed to be out sometime this year. He's in a film called Next Goal Wins, which I thought was quite interesting. And I did a bit of Googling about this. So this is a sports comedy about the American Samoa national football team. So it's based on a BBC documentary, apparently. So this bloke football coach basically says, I'm going to take the American Samoa national team, who I believe were ranked last in the world. And he said he wanted to move them up. I won't tell you how that went. So I won't I won't do any spoilers. But also he's in The Killer. So that's a David Fincher film. So it's another Netflix film, Andy. They're getting everywhere. No release date at the moment, but that's based on a French comic book. So for me, he was my number 2, but I struggled because I didn't want to put anyone on there that I thought, you know, we're just going to discard. If he was 10 years younger, 8 years, maybe even pushing 5 years younger, I thought he'd be really, really good. He's got a strong CV. But I think if they're going for the longer story arc, I think it's probably going to be too old. If they're going to knock out 2 films, I think they probably only could get away with maybe 3. You know, we're getting, I think, to the end of Roger Moore's reign, you know, when he started to look a bit old. I think we're going to be pushing it. What about you? What's your view on my last wild card?
So I think this is a good choice. You know, in some really strong roles, looks the part, would be a believable Bond, I think. But it's the age. 44 is just too old for a long-term Bond project. So aside from that, it'd be on my shortlist for sure. But I think this role comes, like you said, probably 5 or 10 years too late for him to seriously be considered, in my view. So I've also picked a couple of actors. I could mess about and put myself on the list. I am English and I'm age 37 and I look terrible and have no acting skills. Aside from that, I'd be perfect for the role. But let's be serious. And so the first actor I've chosen as a bit of an outsider is Martin Compston. He's 37, Scottish actor. He's been in various TV series, including Monarch of the Glen, Line of Duty for 6 series. He plays D.I. Arnott in the lead role. The series Vigil recently, again, a lead role in that. He was in the film The Damned United, which is about Brian Clough's reign as manager of Leeds United for 44 days. And then he's had a few one-off roles in shows like Ripper Street, Silent Witness, Casualty. And side note, he was also briefly a professional footballer back in the day. I believe Greenock Morton was his team. He made a handful of appearances, but had to retire due to injury. And he's got a future ITV series coming up in due course based on a crime thriller book called Our House. So I think he ticks a lot of the boxes. His age is about right, age 37. He's shown some real versatility in his roles, particularly in Vigil and The Line of Duty. The Scottish heritage, Bond is a Scotsman according to the books, so that might be an interesting addition. But for me, whilst it's an interesting option, the thing that kind of puts it down for me is the physical, imposing nature of Bond. I think is lacking, and that's mainly due to the fact that he's quite petite. He's 5'8". He's not particularly stacked. But in terms of his acting chops, I thought he'd be an interesting option, but probably not on my shortlist, but an interesting wildcard nonetheless. What say you, Jay?
Yeah, I think that was a wild card, Andy, because when you sent me that, I thought, who's he? And then I Googled him. I've only seen the first season of Line of Duty, so his name didn't ring any bells straight away. But obviously, as soon as I saw his face, I thought, oh, yeah, thanks as well. I was planning to watch the other seasons, and now I know he's in 6 of them, so I know he's not going to be killed off anytime shortly. Spoiler warning, anyone. But no, when I looked at him, I didn't think he looks like the type of Bond that we mentioned earlier. You mentioned his height, and I wrote down his height as well. I think if we were trying to shoehorn him into a Bond movie, my note was maybe a future Q. I don't even think personally I would cast him as a baddie, maybe a henchman. But yeah, he didn't do it for me, Andy.
That's a fair point. That's why he is a wild card. Another wild card, again, not one that you would necessarily associate with the Bond role, but is Cillian Murphy, Irish actor, age 45. That straight away throws a couple of red flags up. Let's go with it for the purpose of making an entertaining podcast. Been in tons of stuff, but just to pick out a few of the big things he's in, he's the Scarecrow in the Dark Knight trilogy. He was in the film Inception and is in the TV series Peaky Blinders. And he's also got a future Christopher Nolan film in the books called Oppenheimer, which is due out next year. So, a huge range of big budget TV and film roles. I think that adds to his CV. He has been spoken of in the past as an outsider, so it's not, not a complete wild card, but it has always been in an outside role, never really been one of the favourites. I think his acting skills are tremendous. I really enjoy him in all the things we've mentioned above. His role as Scarecrow is amazing. I think no for Bond, but would probably make a very good Bond villain. How would you rank my second wild card?
I agree. I think he's probably too old in terms of playing Bond. He's obviously a very good actor, and he does appear in quite a few Christopher Nolan films as well. And I agree with all your points, Andy. My note was agree with all your points, but a no for me for Bond. I agree. I think he'd probably play a better villain, actually. Andy, before we kind of move on to the next topic, can I just say I'm a little bit disappointed with your wildcard, Andy, because I was half expecting you to name a wrestler. I thought we was going to slip in a wrestler as one of your wild cards. So I was half expecting that.
I very nearly went with John Cena because now he's grown the hair out a little bit. He's got a nice head of hair. He's obviously jacked to the gills, but he's in his mid-40s. So straight away we'd be talking how he's too old for the role. Obviously, I've mentioned that The Rock has said he wants the role, but he's pushing 50 now, and he's huge, man. That's probably not going to go in his favour. Particularly if he's trying to blend in and be a secret agent. There's nothing secret about him when you've got a 6'5", 20-stone Samoan barreling towards you. So that would be his downfall. I can't really think of any other wrestlers that would make good Bonds, to be honest. Maybe I will research that in my own time for my own benefit, because no one's going to want to listen to me talk about wrestlers in Bond films.
Maybe that's your homework, Andy, where when we do our next bonus episode, at the beginning, you can come back and say, this is, the WWE or whatever franchises do wrestling is the one nomination I put forward as James, as a future James Bond.
There's plenty of Bond villains. I mean, wrestlers have been Bond villains in the past. So, you can imagine someone like a Hulk Hogan as a villain. I mean, he's a villain in real life these days, but he's getting on a bit. Stone Cold Steve Austin as the next Blofeld with that bald head and the goatee beard. So many options.
I'm surprised they've not had any. Well, that they've not had any Bond girls from wrestling, because obviously they've got the divas. Do they call it wrestling divas?
They have had divas in the past, yeah, and there's one or two branched out into acting. One or two branched out into acting of a different sort as well, but we won't discuss that. But yeah, there's a few past and present that would make very, very nice Bond girls. That's for sure.
Okay, so that is the book is top 10 and our 2 wild cards each. Now, our regular listeners for our main podcast will recognize this next feature. So this is the wife pick, Andy. And Andy, you're going to go first because your wife is partaking. Is she doing this because it's the bonus episode, our first bonus? Or is it just because she got to Lech at 10 good-looking men for 10, 15, 30 an hour?
So full disclosure, she didn't go through the full list,
Okay.
but she did partake in the conversation that I had with her earlier today about who may or may not be a good Bond going forward. But I think ultimately she understands that our Patreon members are the core audience, and we really appreciate their hard work. So even she had to finally pull away and do something for this series. So yeah, we had more of a conversation. We didn't go through the full list, but the name that she said straight away was Tom Hardy as a potential Bond. And the reason she said it is that he's a bit gritty, like Daniel Craig. So I think although she's not watched all of the Daniel Craig films, she has watched the first one back in the day. That's the kind of thing that attracted her to the role, is that he's a gritty, more realistic type star. And then she made some good points. She said, is he too big of a star, though? She says, does it need to be a B-lister rather than A-lister? Is an A-lister actor too famous for the role of Bond, as it were, which is quite an interesting question. She also mentioned Richard Madden and Henry Cavill because she's enjoyed their work in previous films and series. And then she also said, should it be a big TV star rather than a big film star, as they don't already have the recognition? So she posed a couple of interesting points there, but the name she called out, Tom Hardy was the first name she called out straight away, and then Richard Madden and Henry Cavill as maybes. So I thought it was quite a worthwhile discussion without really shedding too much light or adding new names to the list. How did your better half get on with this task?
Well, it's nice that the Mrs. Andy has partaken, and she's gave some good feedback there. And it's interesting that she's picked up some themes that we've obviously discussed during this episode as well about, TV, actor, and etc. Well, my better half, as you mentioned, I basically had to get 10 windows up on my screen of each of their faces. So not their CV or anything, Google images, for each of them. And then I had to listen to her go, actually reviewed each of the actors. So obviously that just made me feel really small and insignificant, because obviously some of these actors have got their tops off and everything there in all these images. And then she's scrolling through them, closing various windows and narrow it down. So she said Richard Madden and Reggae Jean Page as the 2. But then she followed that up with based purely on looks and nothing to do with acting. So that was her input. She's basically just leched at these 10 male actors and then made the opinion. So I think she's a wannabe Bond girl, but she's too old now. So
that's very interesting. I think at this stage, before we move on, I should apologise to our listeners for Jay's wife setting feminism back 40 years.
But she did agree that it shouldn't be a woman playing Bond as well. Because then I said, what about some of these other bits that we kind of discussed earlier? She went, no, it has to be a bloke. And then obviously she just then leched. It's funny though, because, the people, listeners that obviously listen to our main podcast, and my wife's feedback where she's basically said Bond is male, chauvinistic, sexist, blah, blah, blah. She then just basically does the similar kind of thing. She didn't slap me about, though, to be fair. But but she did say, Andy, and I was really surprised, she discarded Henry. She doesn't like the look of Henry. I don't know why, but we're going to go for our top 10 now. And I showed her the top 10 and the book is top 10. And she explicitly said, no, not Henry, and also Idris is too old. And then she, she just discarded some other people as well. Like, we've said, oh, not to do it. But no, yeah. So that's the two people she vainly picked out on. So yeah, I agree. I'm going to tell her that, Andy, that she set feminism back 40 years, and I'm probably going to have a word with my daughter to make sure she doesn't, take after the missus. So, Andy, the rating room. This is what we do. So we are going to rank the top 10 people from the bookies have picked that we've covered already. So as I mentioned, we're not going to include our outsiders. So Andy, we're going to do each one in order. So my number one is Richard Madden. Who have you got?
I agree with that pick. Richard Madden is my number one.
So that's interesting because our listeners will know that sometimes we do have a similar ranking, don't we? But sometimes we do have that variation. So let's see, that's going to continue. Ranking. So number two, I've gone for Henry Cavill. What about you?
And I again agree with you. This is getting boring, isn't it?
Oh, 2 for 2.
Henry Cavill, number two. Let's see if our bronze medalist changes things.
So I've gone for Tom Hardy at number 3. What about you?
So I've gone for Idris Elba here, even though, we talked about the age and we talked about various things why he shouldn't be. I just think he's terrific. So I'd be happy with him as my plan C.
Plan C. So would you rather see him in just say 2 films opposed to someone later on your list that might be in say 4, 5, 6 films?
Yeah, I think I probably would.
Okay.
Particularly as we get further down the list. Yeah.
Because, I suppose, in terms of our rankings, in my mind, I was thinking of being an next James Bond for, that fits in our criteria maybe. Because people, I suppose you and I might have a different view. We said James Bond was only going to be made one more time. And then, we had to pick an actor. We might have a different person then, might we? We're just going to say, the franchise is going to end one more film. Who would it be? And then, we probably both pick someone different in terms of these rankings because of the various things that we mentioned. So number 4, I've gone for Regé-Jean Page. How about you?
Number 4, I've gone Tom Hardy.
Okay.
So not too far behind your pick.
No. So number 5, I've gone for Jamie Dornan. How about you?
And I'm a step behind once again. My number 5 is Regé-Jean Page.
There's only a little bit of variation at the moment. So number 6, I've gone for James Norton. And Andy?
Full disclosure, these next few picks are somewhat random because I'm less familiar with their work, and in typical anti-feminist style, I've gone also based on looks as well. So number 6, I've also gone James Norton based on how he looks in his looks. Yeah. There's a rhyme for you.
Yes. So number 7, I've gone for Sam Heughan. And your number 7?
My number 7 is Jamie Dornan.
Okay. Number 8, I've gone for the memorable Tom Hopper. How about you?
I agree. Number 8, Tom Hopper.
Number 9, I've gone for Idris Elba. And Andy?
So that's very interesting because obviously very different from my number 3 of Idris Elba. So there's a big discrepancy there. I've gone for Sam Heughan at number 9.
So that leaves Jamie Bell for my number 10.
As it does with me. And although he's an actor that I am familiar with, more so than kind of ranking 6 to 9, he was the one that straight away I said, no, he's not a Bond actor. So he was my number 1, my number 2, and my number 10 were the first ones I picked when I was ranking them. And Jamie Bell, unfortunately, is an easy number 10.
Yeah, so I think looking for that, Andy, we've got them side by side. The only one I would say jump out is, like you just mentioned, Idris Elba. Everyone else, I'm just looking, is within 1 or 2 places of each other, aren't they?
We've got, I think, do we match 5 out of 10 exactly?
Yeah, and then it is 1 or 2 out, isn't it?
And then 4 of the others, 4 of the others similar. And then Idris I'm surprised he's so far down your list, especially because he's an Arsenal fan as well. I mean, does that change your mind at all?
I've done it purely on, I want an actor to come in for the next 10, 15 years. And where you just said you did your number 1, 2, and that 10, I did my 10, 9 first, because I thought discard those two straight away. And to be honest, Richard Madden and Henry Cavill, I was oohing and ahhing between 1 and 2. So I left those to the end because I knew that they were going to occupy my first and second, but I wasn't quite sure in what order. And then Tom Hardy, I had in my mind as number 3, just because of his age and how busy he is. So that's how I did it. And the others were, Reggae was like the best of the other bunch in terms of the ones we've not covered. So that's interesting, Andy, in terms of what we've got. Is there anything else we want to cover?
I think we're wrapping up. I think my takeaway from this is that you've called out Richard Madden as your number 1, as have I, as did your wife, and also my wife called him out as a maybe as well. So there's a consensus there that Richard Madden should be the next James Bond.
So, Andy, are you basically saying I should go and put my mortgage on Richard Madden at my local bookies then? Is that what you're saying?
I would say maybe not the mortgage, but if you've got a spare couple of quid lying around, it's got to be worth a punt.
Does anyone have a spare quid in the current climate in England? No, that's a good observation, Andy, actually, in terms of what you just picked out there. Me, you, and the missus. And let me just scroll to the top. Did we? Oh, no, to be fair, Richard Madden isn't the number 1 on the bookies, is he?
He's sort of mid-table. That's why I say it's worth a punt.
Yeah. Let me look. What did we say? 9 to 1.
9 to 1, yeah. 6th favourite with the bookies.
So I could spare a quid. I just let my kids know they can't have lunch at school, and then that'd be fine. I can afford £1 there for Richard Madden.
There'll always be another lunch for the kids. They need to learn hard lessons sometimes. So think of this podcast as not only entertainment, but also a public service and, teaching your kids valuable lessons about life.
Indeed. Actually, Andy, before you sign off, as you usually do, Patreon listeners, feel free to, contact us on any of our social media accounts and let us know what they think as well. What have we missed anyone? Have the bookies missed anyone in terms of the top 10? What do people think of our outsiders, Andy, as well? And feel free to, let us know whether could you argue the case for a female Bond? Are we looking at actors too young in the 30s? Do people disagree and think maybe they should go for an older Bond or even younger? Totally reboot the franchise and get someone younger. I've seen Tom Holland mentioned about a very young James Bond. Let us know. I don't know if there's anything else, Andy, that I've missed in terms of what people can kind of feedback in.
Yeah, maybe tell us some of your criteria. Have we missed any criteria out altogether? Does Bond need to be rebooted? Do you go for an origin story? Is it Bond at birth and it follows his childhood? Let us know what you think at the usual addresses. All positive and negative feedback will be treated accordingly. But thank you for listening to this first bonus episode. Future bonus episodes will be upcoming, so stay tuned for those, including a future episode where we'll focus on the announcement as and when it happens. So let's see if we are on the money with our Richard Madden choice, whether the bookies are on the money with Reggae Jean Page, or whether there was a complete outsider that nobody had thought of ends up taking the mantle. But until next time, thanks for listening.